So a new settlement has been announced by the United States government. The Justice Department has reached a settlement with Bank of America. It is a record. It is a fine of $16.65 billion. It is for their actions during the mortgage securities collapse in 2008, the economic collapse in 2008, and all the activities that they did and the fraud that they did leading up to that. So we'll get to their culpability in a second, but I want to give you a sense of the scope of this, the damages here. It's a $9.65 billion cash penalty, $7 billion of consumer relief to struggling homeowners. A lot of times in these deals, devil's in the details, so you'll have to follow up, and we'll have to follow up to make sure that that money actually goes to those people and doesn't go to some other fund that gets funneled back to the banks, right? From time to time, that does happen. But right now, it looks good. Eric Holder, the U.S. Attorney General, says this historic resolution, the largest such settlement on record, goes far beyond the cost of doing business. Now, let's put this in context. The $16.65 billion settlement eclipses the respective $13 billion and $7 billion accords by JP Morgan Chase and Citigroup recently reached to resolve similar claims. That is Reuters reporting that. So now that's a good amount of fines being collected from these companies who are paying these tens of billions of dollars. You know why? Because they did it. They actually did do that fraud. And believe me, if they didn't do that fraud, they're not going to pay $16 billion. In fact, when you look at all the settlements against Bank of America, Reuters explains two things. Actually, first about this particular agreement. It does not cover the $1.27 billion fraud penalty imposed last month by a federal judge over a fraudulent countrywide mortgage scheme known as high-speed swim lane or hustle. Okay, so now Bank of America bought Countrywide, so they might have to pay another over $1 billion in that case. Also, the court does not cover potential criminal claims or claims against individuals. Now, that's why I like this settlement. Now, do I really think that the Justice Department is going to go and arrest these bankers? No, I don't think they're going to do that under any circumstances. That's why we've criticized Eric Holder and his team before. They work for those same law firms that protect. They've worked for them in the past. They'll work for them again. That protect these bankers. The bankers aren't going to jail. But at least in this agreement, it doesn't say they're not going to jail, so it doesn't foreclose that option. All it is Bank of America saying, you were right, we did do this fraud, here's a ton of money to try to compensate for it. Okay, as long as you don't say that they're definitely not going to jail, good. Plus, as Reuters explains, including the latest accord, Bank of America will have paid well over $65 billion to resolve mortgage issues with consumers, investors, and government agencies tied to its purchase of Countrywide in July of 2008 and Merrill 6 months later. Now, Countrywide in particular, but both of those institutions were a huge part of the fraud that led to that economic collapse. Now, I want to play or give you these two final quotes from Reuters to give you perspective here, because how many times did we hear from the right wing, it was the poor people. They took out loans they couldn't afford, and it was their fault. It was African Americans, and we gave them too many loans. It was those government groups, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who just wanted to give more loans to poor people and minorities, and that's what caused the economic collapse, not the greed of the bankers. Interesting. Let me go to the quotes. Bank of America admitted having sold billions of dollars of risky mortgage-backed securities while concealing key facts about the quality of the underlying loans. In other words, they knew it. They knew the underlying loans were bad, and on top of that, they made the situation much worse by creating these risky securities, which then led to the collapse. And that's what I said from day one when covering the collapse. The loans were a huge problem, but the securities that they then made out of those loans was actually what led to the collapse, because those were much larger. And they knew they were bad. That's why they just paid a record $16 billion fine. They didn't pay it because they weren't guilty. They paid it because they knew they were. And finally, it, meaning Bank of America, also admitted to having made misrepresentations to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac about the quality of loans sold to those government-controlled mortgage companies. In other words, it was not Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, as Rush Limbaugh and Fox News told you over and over. Here's Bank of America saying, it was us. We're the ones who tricked Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac into taking those loans, because we were going to make money in the short run. And we were so guilty of that that we're now giving you this record-breaking fine to show you how guilty we were, so that they can settle it. Otherwise, they'd have to pay even more money because they're guilty. They were wrong. Okay. Will that work? Of course not. The very next time, obviously the right-wingers will never talk about this because it's their beloved banks. Now, right-wingers in the country don't love the banks. If you ask them, you do the polls, no, they got no love for the banks at all. But their political leadership, their media leadership, oh, they love the banks. So they won't report this. No, this is done. I mean, if you got 2 sentences out of Fox News during this entire thing, I'd be surprised, right? Rush Limbaugh won't mention how guilty these banks were. But if they ever talk about it again, because it comes up again, they will ignore completely what all the banks admitted to. And they will turn around and say, it was the government-controlled Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac because goddamn poor people tricked the whole country into collapsing the economy. Now you know for a fact that is not true.